"What's wrong, honey? Why are you lying?" Carolyn Carr asked her daughter as Missy burst into her parents' home. She hugged her sobbing daughter and patted her on the back with one hand while stroking her head with the other. "Ben's gone," Missy screamed. "He sent this to me at work." She pulled away from her mother. Her mother, before shoving the envelope into her father's hands, gave her daughter a hug and pulled her to her chest. Frank Carr took the envelope but didn't open it. He asked Missy where Benjamin was. He said she shouldn't be driving with a small child. "Yes," Missy exhaled between sobs and tears. Ben had taken Kevin, their youngest son, to Frank and Carolyn's house and asked them to watch Kevin since he had some business with Benjamin. Not 2 hours later, Missy called her parents. She was in tears. She had been served with divorce papers at work. She arrived at her parents' house in tears. Frank sat in a chair while his wife and daughter collapsed into each other's arms on the couch. Carolyn stroked her daughter's hair as she cried on her mother's chest. Frank pulled the papers out of the envelope and read the divorce petition on the first page. He shook his head grimly as he read the document. There was no notice or discussion between his soon-to-be ex-wife and Benjamin, son-in-law. Missy had been served at work without advance notice, which caused her great shock, upset, and humiliation. When Frank read the document, he looked up, puzzled. He said, "You're filing on the grounds of adultery. You cheated on him." Missy was having an affair with a friend at work. "That's not true. I never cheated on Ben. I love him." Missy uttered the last phrase with a cry that sounded like a wounded animal howling. "I'm going to nail his ass to my office wall," Frank thought to himself, making up stupid accusations. To defame Missy and get a divorce, he probably cheated on her as he continued reading the divorce petition. Frank felt his left eyebrow rise, a sure sign of displeasure. "Missy, why would Ben think you were cheating on him?" With a colleague, Missy continued to stare irritably at her father. "He kissed me at happy hour after work. I'd had too much to drink, and as soon as I came to my senses, I pushed him away. That's all that happened. I swear to you." As Frank continued to read, his eyebrow continued to. Frank's forehead started to rise, which didn't go unnoticed by his wife. Carolyn asked, with irritation in her voice, "What's your point? Are you accusing your daughter of something?" "No, or at least not yet," Frank replied. "We've known Ben for 7 or 8 years. I work with him every day. It's totally unlike him, so I'm trying to figure out what's on his mind." Carolyn snapped at Frank as she continued to comfort Missy. She'd brought Missy a box of tissues, and a pile of used tissues was growing on the coffee table in front of Missy. "How can you even think about taking his side after what he did to our daughter?" "I'm not taking sides until I've finished reading this petition," Frank said. "Who is he accusing you of cheating with?" His daughter replied, "Why does he think it was an affair and not an innocent hug and drunken kiss?" Missy pulled away from her mother and wiped her face with a tissue. "He thinks I had an affair with Andy Hebert, one of our sales reps, but I didn't. He must have seen something and misunderstood." Frank nodded slowly, and what could he have seen? Missy cried again. Frank's expression changed from understanding and sympathetic to what his wife called a stony expression as he continued to read the documents. Ben is requesting a 50-50th split of custody of Benjamin, naming himself as the custodial parent. Frank looked at them. Frank looked at his daughter with a grim expression. He's not asking for custody of or visitation with the minor known as Kevin Andrew Davis. He's also asking that his name be removed from the birth certificate of the minor Kevin Andrew Davis, and that Kevin's last name be changed. Carolyn and Missy both gasped at this revelation. Missy threw herself into her mother's arms and began sobbing and wailing. "Missy, look at me," Frank said loudly, cutting off the screams. "Ben says you were unfaithful to him with Andy Hebert. Kevin's middle name is Andrew because you said you've always liked that name. I'll ask you again. Did you cheat on Ben with this Andy guy?" Missy let out a loud shriek and began sobbing loudly in her mom's arms. Carolyn looked at her husband in anger. "Please stop," she hissed. Frank asked his wife, with a stone face, what was it exactly? He could see the rage boiling in his wife's eyes. Frank picked up the piece of paper. I'm curious as to why Ben isn't asking for any custody of Kevin. This DNA test shows that the probability that Ben is Kevin's father is less than 0.000002%. So Carolyn, can you tell me how long you've known about this? It's been almost 30 years since you got married. Carolyn knew her husband better than he knew himself. She realized that the marriage was on the brink of collapse if she'd admitted to her husband that Missy had told her that she wasn't sure who the baby's father was. Then Frank might well have divorced her. However, if she lied, and Frank found out, if she lied, then her marriage is definitely over, but only if Frank found out. Carolyn shook her head and rolled the dice. I didn't know this. I think Missy is as shocked as we are. I doubt Frank said dry, but there is one way to reassure. I need to see both of your cell phones. Carolyn stood up suddenly and pointed her finger angrily at her husband. You're not going to invade our privacy, she said. You're not going through our phones. Frank looked at his wife and nodded slowly. They say, people who have nothing to hide don't hide anything. I assume you have something to hide, so let me explain it to you very clearly so that you don't have a chance to make a mistake or misunderstand what I'm saying. Either you both unlock your phones and give them to me right now, or I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. Carolyn looked at her husband with eyes narrowed with rage. I've never given you a reason not to trust me. We're not giving up our cell phones and we're not getting a divorce. Frank looked at his wife, his expression unreadable. I've caught you in a lot of over the years. I've let a few things slide because I figured the argument we'd have over the lies wouldn't be worth the hassle. I'm ashamed of what I've allowed you to do all these years. I think the lies were to cover up the cheating, which I wouldn't have thought of. I didn't realize until today that a daughter would try to fool her husband into raising someone else's child. To hell with the noise your cell phones are making. And if any of you think I'm bluffing, try and find out this was a side of Frank that neither Carolyn nor Missy had ever seen. Carolyn was adamant. It's not going to happen, she said, her tone firm and her eyes locked on Frank. I'll clean you out in the divorce. I'll take everything you own. You'll be lucky if you get to live in your car. Frank rose from his chair, tossed the papers onto the coffee table. He looked at his wife and daughter and shook his head, heading for the kitchen. A minute later he returned, carrying a plastic Ziploc bag. He twisted the bag in the palm of his hand and used it like a glove, picking up the handful of used napkins lying on the table. In front of Missy, he put the bag back the way it was, put the wipes in, and closed the zipper. He pinched it between his thumb and forefinger. What are you doing? Carolyn's voice was loud. She was angry, but she was trying to keep it together. She pointed to the bag of used tissues. In nearly 30 years of marriage, Frank had never once confronted this aspect of her personality. He was beginning to wonder if he even knew his wife. I'm going to find out from Ben, who he used for DNA testing to find out that Kevin wasn't his son. Well, I'm going to find out if Missy is my daughter, or if you've been lying to me for almost 30 years. Carolyn shrieked and lunged at Frank, digging her nails into his face. If it hasn't happened to you, it's hard to describe the effect of having the spirit knocked out of you. You hear it all the time, but most people have never actually experienced it. When you're deprived of oxygen, your body goes into panic mode because it suddenly can't get air into your lungs. Not being able to breathe or get even a little bit of air into yourself is terrifying. It's a terrifying feeling, like you're about to die. The seconds it takes for your lungs to fill with air again seem like minutes as your body struggles to breathe. Frank practiced karate for 6 years when he was younger. That was 40 years ago, but some things are never forgotten. His wife's fingernails dug into his face, so Frank delivered a palm strike to the top of Carolyn's solar plexus. He knew it wouldn't leave much bruising, but it did knock all the air out of Carolyn's lungs. Her rolling around on the floor, gulping air with her mouth in terror and unable to breathe, caused Carolyn to panic, which in turn caused Missy to panic, as her mother grabbed her throat and tried to breathe while his wife rolled around on the floor. Frank quickly headed to the back of the house where his home office was located. He knew that in about a minute, Carolyn would start breathing normally again, and he wanted to get out of the house as soon as possible. Frank grabbed his MacBook Air and his iPad and quickly logged into their Wi-Fi router and changed the password to the router. Carolyn could use her phone to access the internet, but she never did anything on her phone except scroll through Facebook or Reddit. She couldn't do any banking or credit card transactions from her phone without Wi-Fi. Frank quickly threw a couple of changes of clothes into his backpack and walked out of the house, passing his wife, who sat breathing deeply, and said goodbye to 30 years of a seemingly happy marriage. Frank left quickly until he reached the nearest McDonald's where he used their Wi-Fi. Frank logged into Safari on his Fi system. He paid for and closed their joint American Express MX Gold card. Then he logged into Chase and paid off and closed their joint Chase credit card. He then logged into Chase Bill Pay and wrote a check to himself to pay the remaining balance on their joint account to the landscape company he owned. He had long ago registered his company as a payee. Frank Adam Davis said in an even tone, devoid of intonation. "Hi, Adam," Frank said to his daughter, who was soon to be ex-father-in-law. Frank said, "It's a pretty bad situation, isn't it? It couldn't be worse." Adam opened the door for Frank and led him out to the patio to watch the golfers. The Davis house was on a cul-de-sac next to the golf course at the country club, which both families belonged to. Adam's wife had won the club's women's championship for the past 4 years. For years, Adam had been extremely proud of this. Seated on the Davis patio with a bourbon in his hand, Frank began the conversation. "How's Ben doing?" Adam tilted his head toward Frank as if to ask, "Is this a stupid question?" "What Ben is going through is hardly the worst thing a man can go through. I'd say, with the exception of losing a child. That's exactly what he's going through, isn't it? He's losing his youngest son and you're losing your youngest grandson. How could Missy do that to him? What happened to that girl?" Frank sighed and shook his head. "She was always spoiled. Instead of insisting on her own way, I just turned a blind eye to it. I guess that makes it as much my fault as anyone's." Frank nodded in agreement. "Maybe, but probably not. She's a grown woman, capable of making her own decisions and taking responsibility for her actions. Where is Ben hiding? I assume Benjamin is with him. They're at the lake house. He doesn't want to see Missy or talk to her. The 4-year, it's too young for him to see his mom having a nervous breakdown. It's a good thing Kevin isn't even a year old yet, he won't remember. I can't say the same for Ben, though. He was so happy to have 2 little boys." Frank shook his head sadly with tears in his eyes. "I understand. I don't want to see her either. Or her mother. It turns out my sweet, loving wife knew all along that there was a chance Ben wasn't the boy's father and didn't tell me a damn thing about it. Now I think I'm not Missy's dad and I've let Carolyn down." Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, Adam said, "I think you're right." Frank raised his glass to Adam in silent acknowledgement. Renowned athlete and Port Arthur, Texas native Babe Diedrichson Zacharias. Like this little girl, Babe Davis Landry, excelled in tennis and golf in high school and college. Babe even spent a year playing against professionals as an amateur in LPGA tournaments before becoming pregnant with Ben. If Missy wasn't Benjamin's mother, I really think she would have beaten Missy. I've never seen her so angry. Adam continued. Frank shook his head. "Keep her in line. I don't want her in trouble because of those 2 cheating girls. It's bad enough that I'm probably going to jail. You'll be in jail too, Frank. What the hell is going on here?" Frank was all covered in face cream. He'd popped into CVS to get some Neosporin and a face patch before driving up to Adam and Babe's house. Frank told Adam the story of grabbing Missy's used wipes for DNA testing and Carolyn's subsequent attack on him before he punched her in the stomach. Frank and Adam normally had a good relationship. I'd never agree to punch a woman, but there's no doubt she deserved a good kick in the ass. I did it, but I know these 2 are going to make up another story, so I figure I'm going to get arrested soon. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Could you contact Ben and let him know he's going to have to handle this on his own for a while? His son. Ian Law not only worked for Frank's landscaping company, but he bought 25% off the business. Of course he did. He has a disposable cell phone, and I'll make sure to give you his number. Their conversation was interrupted when Babe Adams' wife walked through the kitchen and into the office. She looked at Frank coldly and, keeping her eyes on her visitor, asked her husband what he was doing there and why the police were pulling into the driveway now. Relax. Frank is on Ben's side in all of this. It turns out Carolyn knew about Missy's affair and that Kevin might not be Ben's son. Frank left home. Whatever Adam was going to say next was interrupted by the front doorbell ringing. Babe opened the door to the police officers and turned to Frank, who nodded at their question. "I figured this would happen. Turn around and let them handcuff you." The officer sat Frank down and asked him to tell them what happened. Frank described how Carolyn attacked him and how he defended himself by showing them the scratches on his face. The officers were sympathetic but indifferent. "If you had called us right then, they probably would have arrested her instead of you. I'll have Ben get your lawyer involved." Adam said. Babe hugged Frank as the police. 6 months later, the anger had mostly died down. Missy pushed Ben to get a divorce, first asking for counseling and then imposing some pretty strict conditions when he refused. DNA tests showed that Missy was Frank's daughter, which made him feel a mix of ways. He'd always loved Missy as his daughter, but he didn't respect her. They barely spoke, and he didn't think that would change anytime soon. She wouldn't let him see his grandson, Kevin. There was a photo of Frank taken at a drugstore that showed scratches on his face. Frank was found not guilty of assaulting his wife. He was divorcing Carolyn. He didn't trust or respect her. She was fighting the divorce too. Her attorneys put up roadblocks. If it hadn't been for the robbery, Carolyn and Missy would still be together. They were at a nightclub when they were attacked. They couldn't describe their attacker, but cameras captured a small man in black with a ski mask. He was hitting them with something that looked like a weighted stick. The footage showed the two women being beaten with a steel bar until the couple were badly injured and in hospital, but they still didn't know who had attacked them. The only person who could have had a motive was Missy's husband, who was trying to divorce her. However, Ben Davis was ruled out as a suspect because of his height. There was still an open investigation into the attack, but there were no leads or suspects. The two women were seriously injured with several broken bones and knocked out teeth, but the attack didn't leave Carolyn and Missy with any lasting damage. They stopped going out to nightclubs, and as their mum Noya got more worried about further attacks, they spent most of their time at home annoying each other. They let their divorce go ahead without any problems. They split custody of Benjamin 50/50ths, with Ben as the main carer. Neither Ben nor Missy got child support or spousal support. Ben's name was taken off Kevin's birth certificate and the court. The DNA test showed that Andrew Hebert was Kevin's father. Andy was ordered to pay child support to Missy. Andy's wife filed for divorce on grounds of adultery, and Andy was ordered to pay child support for their 3 children plus spousal support as per the court order. Andy was a stay-at-home dad since his first child was born. This put him in a tough spot financially, and it's unlikely he'll bounce back. On the other hand, Ben was able to keep things afloat, thanks to Frank's support and his own investments. The business his son Benjamin was doing well, but he was sad when he had to stay with his mother at Carolyn's house. His mother seemed angry with his father, or inconsolably crying because she missed him. His grandmother seemed to be in a constant state of rage directed against his grandfather. The fact that Frank was a popular choice for the single women at their country club made things worse for Carolyn. Adam and Babe continued to support their son and grandson when needed. Babe won the women's golf championship for the 5th year in a row, even though her set of golf clubs was missing a few.